They say some bonds are written in the stars, destined and unbreakable. But what happens when the most powerful wolf in the kingdom looks his fated mate in the eyes and tells her she isn't good enough? What happens when that same king, 5 years later, finds himself on his knees, begging that same rejected Omega to save the son who's dying because of the choice he made? This is a story about sacrifice. About the kind of love that destroys you slowly, one heartbeat at a time. About a healer who had to choose between saving a child and protecting her own shattered heart. And about an alpha king who learned too late that some mistakes can never be unmade, no matter how many tears you shed. Before we dive into this emotional journey, if you love stories about fated mates, impossible choices, and love that transcends rejection, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love connecting with you all. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have so many more heart-wrenching stories coming your way. Now let me take you to the mountain village of Thornridge, where our story begins with a woman who had learned to live in the spaces between heartbeats, in the quiet moments where hope had long since died. Chapter 1. Rowan Ashford had built a life from broken pieces, and she had made peace with it. Well, perhaps peace was too generous a word. Acceptance might be closer to the truth. Survival was probably the most honest. The mountain village of Thornridge sat cradled between peaks that scraped the belly of heaven, a place where winter arrived in September and didn't leave until May, where the wind carried the howls of lonely wolves, and where people came when they had nowhere else to go. Her healing practice operated out of a stone cottage that leaned slightly to the left, as if even the building itself was tired. Herbs hung from every rafter, yarrow and sage, foxglove and feverfew, their mingled scent so thick it clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. She had stopped noticing it years ago. She treated rogues who stumbled into town with infected wounds and haunted eyes. She tended to farmers whose bodies were breaking down from decades of hard labor. She held the hands of mothers whose children burned with fever, whispering prayers she didn't quite believe in anymore, while her healing gift did what medicine alone could not. They paid her in bread still warm from the oven, in firewood that kept the killing cold at bay, in hand-sewn quilts that smelled like someone else's home. She never asked for coin. She had learned that coin was useless when you were trying to purchase something as simple as belonging. Rowan was 26 now, though some mornings she felt ancient. Being an Omega in the Northern Territories meant existing in a permanent state of underestimation. Too weak, they said. Too emotional. Too soft for anything that mattered. But her hands knew things that defied their assumptions. They knew how to coax shattered bones back into alignment. How to draw poison from wounds that should have killed. How to quiet pain that made grown wolves weep like children. Her gift was rare among Omegas, a healing touch that worked deeper than herbs or stitches could reach. It was as if she could speak directly to a wolf's soul, could convince their body to remember what wholeness felt like. She had been born with it, this strange and terrible blessing, though she had never understood why the moon goddess would give such a gift to someone destined to live in the margins. She didn't think about Alpha King Silverton Blackthorn anymore. Or at least, that's what she told herself during the day, when sunlight made it easier to lie. 6 years was long enough to bury most memories, to let them fossilize under layers of new routines and carefully constructed indifference. But on nights when sleep refused to come, when the mate bond she had tried so desperately to smother flickered in her chest like a candle in a storm, on those nights, she remembered everything. The throne room. The way the afternoon light had streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. The moment their eyes met across that vast space, and something ancient and undeniable had snapped into place between them. The mate bond, that legendary connection that was supposed to be sacred, irrevocable, eternal. She remembered the way the world had tilted sideways. How every wolf in that room had felt the shift, the power of a true fated bond declaring itself. She remembered the hope that had bloomed in her chest, wild and reckless and doomed. And then she remembered his voice. Cold and final, despite the way his hands had trembled. Telling her to leave. Telling her that the council had already arranged his marriage to Luna Serafina of the Eastern Pax, a political alliance that would prevent war, secure borders, strengthen the kingdom. Telling her that there was no room for a poor Omega healer in the life of an Alpha King, no matter what the moon goddess had planned. She had left that night, walking out of the castle with her heart in pieces, feeling the incomplete mate bond settle into her chest like a stone. He had married Serafina within 3 weeks. And Rowan had learned that some rejections don't kill you quickly. They just hollow you out slowly, one breath at a time, until you become something that looks like a person but feels like an empty room. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a wolf she didn't recognize. He wore common traveling clothes. No pack insignia, no royal colors, nothing that would mark him as anything other than a messenger passing through. But Rowan had spent 6 years learning to read the things people tried to hide. She saw the military precision in his posture. The way his eyes scanned the village before approaching her door, cataloging exits and threats with practiced efficiency. The slight bulge under his coat that suggested weapons he hoped he wouldn't need to use. This was a royal guard trying very hard to look like he wasn't. He handed her a sealed envelope without speaking, and disappeared before she could form a question. As if he had been ordered to deliver the letter and then vanish, leaving no trail that could connect the castle to her door. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind used in council chambers and formal declarations. There was no name on the outside, no official seal that would identify the sender. Just her name written in elegant script that made her stomach twist with recognition. She stood in her doorway for a long moment, the envelope heavy in her hands, knowing with absolute certainty that opening it would change everything. Wishing desperately that she could pretend it had never arrived. That she could throw it into her fireplace and watch it burn and continue living her small, safe, broken life. But healers don't get to ignore calls for help. That's not how the gift works. It doesn't let you choose who deserves healing and who doesn't. It just burns in your hands, demanding to be used, regardless of personal cost. Inside, the message was brief. Unsigned. Desperate. The heir is dying. Every healer in the kingdom has tried and failed. You are the only one who can save him. Please. I am begging you. Come to Ironhaven Castle. Rowan read it 3 times, her hands trembling harder with each pass. The heir. Silverton's son. A pup she had never met, born from a marriage that should have been hers, dying from something no one else could fix. The cruelty of it was almost poetic. The universe asking her to save the child of the man who had rejected her. The living proof of the life he had chosen over their fated bond. The pup who existed because Silverton had decided political power was more important than destiny. She should have burned the letter. Should have sent a message back refusing. Should have protected herself the way Silverton had protected his kingdom when he cast her aside. But even as the thoughts formed, even as every instinct screamed at her to stay away, Rowan knew she would go. Because beneath the hurt and the anger and the 6 years of practiced indifference, she was still a healer. And healers don't let children die, even when saving them might destroy what's left of your own heart. Chapter 2. She packed her leather satchel that afternoon with hands that knew the routine by heart. Supplies, herbs, bandages, suturing thread, the worn tools of her trade. Everything she owned fit into one bag, a reminder of how little she had built and how easily it could all be left behind. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and turned the sky to bruised purple, Rowan Ashford locked her cottage door, left a note for her elderly neighbor to tend her garden, and began the 3-day journey to Iron Haven. The Northern Territories stretched vast and unforgiving between Thornridge and the castle. Rowan traveled on foot, unable to afford a horse, sleeping rough under stars that offered no comfort and judged nothing. Every mile closer made the dormant mate bond in her chest stir a little more, like something waking from a long hibernation. By the second day, it had progressed from a dull ache to a persistent burning. A reminder that proximity to your fated mate is never neutral. It either completes you or destroys you, and she had already learned which one Silverton had chosen. On the second night, she camped in a grove of ancient pines, building a small fire that did little to chase away the cold. She tried to sleep, but her wolf was restless, pacing beneath her skin, confused and yearning. Her wolf didn't understand why they were running toward the thing that had broken them. Wolves are simpler that way. They know instinctively that you don't return to the place where you were wounded. But Rowan wasn't going back for herself. She was going back for a child who had done nothing wrong except be born from the wrong bond. The castle appeared on the horizon just after dawn on the 4th day. Massive stone towers rising against a pale sky, banners of the Northern Territories snapping in the wind like angry declarations. Iron Haven. The seat of power. The place where her life had shattered 6 years ago. Rowan had only seen it once before, and the sight of it now filled her with a nauseous mixture of dread and something she refused to name. Something that felt dangerously close to longing. The gates opened before she reached them, as if they had been watching for her arrival. Guards in royal armor flanked the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral. But she saw the way their eyes tracked her movement, the way their hands rested near weapons they didn't draw. They had been ordered to let her in, but that didn't mean they trusted her. She was, after all, the Omega who had once been rejected by their king. The living reminder of a choice that had been whispered about in every corner of the kingdom. Inside, the castle was exactly as she remembered. Cold stone corridors lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles. The smell of wood smoke and authority. The echo of footsteps that made you feel small and temporary. But there was something else now, something that hadn't been there before. A heaviness in the air, a sense of mourning that clung to every surface. The servants who passed her moved with hushed efficiency, their faces drawn and exhausted. This was a place holding its breath, waiting for death to arrive. A guard, different from the ones at the gate, older, with silver threading through his dark hair, led her through winding hallways, deeper into the castle, past rooms she had never seen and doors that remained closed, hiding secrets she would never know. They climbed stairs that seemed to go on forever. With each step, the mate bond burned hotter in her chest. She could feel him now, somewhere close, the connection between them pulling taut like a rope about to snap. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, confused and yearning, unable to understand why they were running toward the thing that had once broken them. The guard stopped in front of a heavy wooden door carved with symbols of protection and healing. He knocked twice, a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel, before pushing it open. Beyond lay a room flooded with afternoon light. And standing in the center of it, backlit by windows that overlooked the entire territory, was Silverton Blackthorn. 6 years had changed him in ways that made her heart clench against her will. The young king who had rejected her had been 25, confident in a way that bordered on arrogance, certain that his choices were correct because they were his. The man before her now looked carved from exhaustion. His dark hair was longer, shot through with premature silver at the temples. His amber eyes, which had once burned with authority, now held a hollow desperation that made him look breakable. He wore his crown like a burden instead of a prize. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, something in his carefully constructed composure cracked. They stood that way for a long moment, neither speaking. The mate bond screaming between them, loud enough to drown out every rational thought. Rowan felt it trying to complete itself. Felt her body swaying toward him against her will. Felt her wolf howling for a bond that should have been sealed 6 years ago. Across the room, she watched Silverton's hands curl into fists. Watched his jaw clench. Watched him fight the same losing battle. Finally he spoke, and his voice was rougher than she remembered, scraped raw by something that looked a lot like grief. "Thank you for coming." Rowan forced herself to stay still, to keep her voice steady, to remember why she was here. "Your letter said your son is dying." "He is." Silverton's throat worked as he swallowed, and she hated that she noticed. Every healer in the kingdom has tried. Physicians from the eastern packs, shamans from the southern territories, even a witch from across the sea. Nothing works. He's 4 years old, and he's never walked without support. His spine is slowly turning to stone. They say he has weeks at most. And you think I can help him when they couldn't? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with 6 years of unspoken hurt. "I think you're the only one who can." His eyes held hers, and in them she saw something that looked like drowning. "Please, Rowan. I'm not asking as your king. I'm asking as a father who's watching his child die." She wanted to hate him. Wanted to feel nothing but cold satisfaction at watching the man who had rejected her beg for her help. But standing there, seeing the way grief had hollowed him out, seeing the desperate love of a parent written across every line of his face, all she felt was tired. "Where is he?" Chapter 3. Silverton led her through another door into an adjoining chamber that had been converted into a nursery, though nursery seemed too cheerful a word for this place. Medical equipment lined the walls, things Rowan recognized and things she didn't. Charts tracking symptoms and failed treatments. Books on rare conditions left open to pages that offered no hope. And in the center of it all, lying motionless on a bed piled with cushions and blankets, was Ashton. The pup was small, painfully so, with silver-white fur that seemed too bright against the dark fabrics surrounding him. Metal braces wrapped around his hind legs, cruel and mechanical, the kind of thing you put on a broken machine rather than a living child. His breathing came shallow and labored, each inhale a visible effort that made his small ribs stand out in sharp relief. But his eyes, when they flickered open to look at the newcomers, were his father's exactly, amber and bright and holding on to hope with a fierceness that made Rowan's heart crack clean through. She moved toward him slowly, instinct overriding everything else. This was a child in pain, and she was a healer, and nothing else mattered in that moment. Not the past, not the mate bond, not the impossible situation she had walked into. She knelt beside the bed, keeping her movements careful and non-threatening, the way she would approach any frightened patient. "Hello, Ashton. My name is Rowan. May I look at you?" The pup's eyes tracked her face, then shifted to his father standing behind her. Some silent communication passed between them, a question asked and answered, before Ashton gave a tiny nod. Permission granted. Rowan reached out and placed a hand gently on the pup's shoulder. Just a light touch, meant to reassure, to assess, to let her healing sense read what was wrong. The moment her skin made contact, agony exploded through her body. It wasn't physical pain, though it felt like lightning in her veins. It was the mate bond, dormant and damaged for 6 years, suddenly roaring back to life with a violence that stole her breath. Every nerve ending caught fire. Her wolf surged forward, desperate and confused, trying to complete a bond that had been left bleeding and raw. The room spun. Her vision whited out. And through it all she felt Silverton, felt him like he was inside her skin, felt the bond reaching for him with hooks and teeth and refusing to be denied. Across the room, she heard him collapse. Heard the crash of his body hitting the floor. Heard the strangled sound that ripped from his throat. The guards, who had been standing at attention, rushed forward, shouting orders, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. Rowan yanked her hand back from Ashton, gasping, shaking, her healing sense still active and screaming information at her that she could barely process through the pain. But even in the chaos, even through the agony of the mate bond trying to tear her apart from the inside, she understood. This wasn't a disease. This wasn't a curse. This was something far worse. This was a bloodline rejection. The pup's wolf was rejecting his own body because his father's faded mate bond was incomplete. And she, the rejected mate, was the only one who could stop it. The door burst open, and royal physicians rushed in, surrounding Silverton, checking his pulse, demanding to know what happened. But he pushed them away with trembling hands, struggling to his feet. His amber eyes locked on Rowan with an expression that held too many things to name. Understanding. Guilt. Terror. You felt it, she said, and it wasn't a question. I've always felt it. His voice was barely a whisper, raw and broken. I thought if I ignored it long enough, if I pretended the bond didn't exist, it would fade. I was wrong. I was so catastrophically wrong. Chapter 4. One of the physicians, an older wolf with grey streaking his muzzle and eyes that had seen too much, cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, perhaps we should explain to the healer what she's dealing with. Silverton didn't break eye contact with Rowan. His voice was hollow when he spoke. Tell her. The physician turned to her, his expression grave. The young prince suffers from incomplete bond syndrome. It's exceedingly rare. We've only documented a handful of cases in the last century. It occurs when an alpha king's heir is conceived outside of a true fated mate bond. The pup's genetics are at war with themselves, trying to reconcile bloodlines that should not exist together. The spine ossifies. The limbs fail. And eventually, the internal organs begin to shut down. There is no medical cure because it isn't a medical condition. It's a fundamental rejection written into his very DNA. Rowan looked at Ashton, at the small silver-white pup struggling to breathe, at the metal braces that were doing nothing to save him. And you've known this whole time. We suspected from birth, the physician admitted, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame. But we only confirmed it 5 months ago when the deterioration accelerated. By then it was already too late to prevent. Too late to prevent, Rowan repeated slowly, the full horror of it settling over her like a shroud. Because preventing it would have required Silverton to complete his fated mate bond before his son was born. which he couldn't do because he had already rejected me and married someone else. The silence that followed was answer enough. Another voice spoke from the doorway. Female, cultured, cold as winter frost. Which means my son is dying because my husband chose duty over destiny. Rowan turned to see Luna Serafina standing in the threshold. She was exactly as Rowan remembered from the glimpses she'd seen 6 years ago. Beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, all sharp edges and perfect composition. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elaborate style, her gown the deep green of the Eastern Pacs. But her eyes, when they landed on Rowan, held no warmth, just a hollow recognition. Serafina, Silverton started, but she cut him off with a gesture. Don't. Her voice was controlled, but something brittle lurked beneath it. We both know what this is. What she is. I've always known, from the moment we married. I felt your distance. Felt the way you would never fully bond with me. The way your wolf remained separate and contained. She looked at Rowan. I told myself it was just your personality. That some alphas were naturally reserved. But I knew. We all knew. She moved into the room with the grace of someone who had spent years learning to navigate court politics. I entered this marriage with open eyes, a political alliance to prevent war, to secure borders, to build power. Love was never part of the arrangement. But I thought. Her voice cracked slightly, the first break in her composure. I thought over time something real might grow. That we might build a partnership even without a fated bond. I was wrong. Rowan wanted to leave, wanted to be anywhere but here, having this conversation. But something kept her rooted in place. Something in the other woman's expression that looked too much like her own pain. I watch you heal my son, Serafina continued, her voice dropping lower. I watch the way Silverton's entire body orients toward you when you enter a room. I watch him fight a bond that's trying to complete itself. And I finally understand the full scope of what he sacrificed. What we all sacrificed. She paused. You're his mate. His true Luna. And I'm just the woman who wears the crown because he needed someone to stand beside him for appearances. I didn't come here to take anything from you, Rowan said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. I know. Serafina's expression softened slightly, something almost like sympathy flickering across her features. You came here to save a pup. To do what healers do, regardless of personal cost. But whether you intended it or not, your presence has exposed a truth we were all pretending didn't exist. She walked to Ashton's bedside, placed a gentle hand on his silver-white fur. Save him, please. He deserves to live regardless of the mistakes his father made. Then she looked back at Rowan, and her next words were weighted with meaning. But don't save him. She tilted her head toward where Silverton stood, broken and desperate. Let him live with what he's done. Then she walked out, her footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Rowan standing in a room full of people and feeling more alone than she had in 6 years. Chapter 5. Rowan stood, her legs unsteady, her entire body still trembling from the mate bond's violent reawakening. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far from this castle and this king and this impossible situation as her legs could carry her. Healing Ashton would mean touching him again. And touching him would mean enduring that agony repeatedly, feeling the mate bond scream for completion while knowing it would never be allowed to finish. It would be torture, slow and exquisite, and it might destroy her completely. But even as the thoughts formed, even as fear threatened to drown her, Rowan looked down at Ashton. The pup was watching her with his father's eyes, and in them she saw no manipulation, no expectation, just the quiet desperation of a child who knew he was dying and didn't understand why. "Please don't leave me," Ashton whispered, his voice so small it barely carried across the room. "Everyone always leaves." And Rowan, who had sworn 6 years ago never to let Silverton Blackthorn hurt her again, felt her resolve crumble into dust. She took a breath that hurt. Then another. Then she looked at the Alpha King and said the words that would seal her fate. "I'll try to save him. But I need accommodations, supplies, and everyone out of this room except medical staff when I'm working." Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan established a routine that was slowly destroying her from the inside out. She woke before dawn, forced herself to eat something she couldn't taste, walked to the nursery with legs that felt heavier each day. She spent an hour with her hands on Ashton, healing what she could while the mate bond tried to tear her apart. Then she retreated to her chamber, collapsed onto the bed, and tried not to think about how much more of this she could endure before it broke something in her that couldn't be fixed. Ashton was improving. Slowly, painfully slowly, but improving. His breathing came easier. The ossification in his spine had stopped progressing and might even be reversing. Once on the 7th day, his back legs twitched with something that looked almost like voluntary movement. But the cost was mounting with every session. Every healing made the mate bond stronger, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. Rowan found herself thinking about Silverton at odd moments. Her wolf fixating on his scent, on the memory of his voice, on the desperate look in his eyes when he watched her heal his son. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was just the bond doing what bonds do, trying to complete itself, regardless of whether completion would destroy them both. And Silverton was suffering too. She could see it in the way his hands shook when she was near, in the way he gripped the window frame like he needed something to hold on to, in the way he left the room more and more frequently as the sessions progressed, as if distance might somehow lessen the bond's pull. On the 10th day, he didn't come to the nursery at all. A royal physician stayed with her instead, watching silently as she worked. But the mate bond still burned through her because proximity didn't require line of sight. She could feel him somewhere in the castle, could feel his wolf pacing and snarling and demanding something they couldn't have. The court had begun to notice. Rowan heard the whispers as she moved through the castle, saw the way servants' eyes tracked her movements, felt the weight of speculation following her everywhere. The rumors built like a storm gathering strength. Some said she was the Alpha King's secret lover, summoned for forbidden meetings. Others whispered that she was a sorceress using dark magic to heal the prince while ensnaring the king. A few, the ones who were older and wiser and remembered how fated mate bonds worked, spoke in hushed tones about rejected mates and incomplete bonds and the price of choosing duty over destiny. Chapter 6. On the 14th day, everything changed. The healing session started normally. Rowan placed her hands on Ashton's spine, pushed past the mate bond's agony, found her healing sense, and began to work. But something was different this time. Ashton's wolf was more responsive, more present, as if it had finally begun to trust that healing was possible. Encouraged, Rowan pushed harder, poured more energy into the damaged areas, tried to accelerate the reversal that had been progressing so slowly. It was too much. Ashton screamed, a high, keening sound that no 4-year-old should be able to make, and his small body convulsed. The metal braces on his legs rattled violently. His back arched in a way that looked wrong, painful, dangerous. Rowan tried to pull back, tried to ease off the healing energy. But the mate bond had other ideas. It surged forward with a force she couldn't control, pulling her deeper into the connection, binding her to Ashton in a way that felt permanent and terrifying. She felt his pain like it was her own. Felt his wolf's panic. Felt the exact moment when her healing energy became too much for his small body to process. She had to stop. Had to pull away before she hurt him worse. But her hands wouldn't move. The mate bond had taken over, using her healing gift as a conduit to complete itself, and she was trapped in the middle of something she couldn't control. Then Silverton was there, his hands closing around her wrists, pulling her bodily away from his son. The moment their skin touched, the mate bond exploded. It wasn't like the burning ache that had been building for days. This was total, complete, overwhelming connection. She felt Silverton's wolf like it was inside her chest. Felt his fear for his son and his desperate need for her and his soul-deep regret for everything he had done. Felt the bond reaching for completion with hooks and teeth, demanding, screaming, refusing to be denied any longer. They collapsed together, hitting the floor hard, their bodies tangled and shaking. The bond was trying to complete itself by force, trying to seal them together permanently, and it took every shred of Rowan's willpower to fight it, to pull herself back from the edge of something that would bind her to this man forever. Across from her, Silverton was fighting the same battle. His amber eyes were wild, his breathing ragged, his entire body trembling with the effort of resisting a biological imperative that was designed to be irresistible. They pulled apart finally, gasping, crawling away from each other on the stone floor like wounded animals. The distance helped. Not much, but enough that Rowan could think again, could remember that completing the bond would solve nothing. He was still married to another woman. Still an alpha king with responsibilities that didn't include a poor Omega healer. Still the man who had rejected her once and would do it again if his kingdom required it. Behind them, Ashton had stopped screaming. The royal physicians were surrounding him, checking his vitals, murmuring urgent assessments. But Rowan couldn't focus on that. Couldn't focus on anything except the way her entire body ached for completion, for Silverton, for a bond that would destroy her if she let it finish. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't be near you and not." "I know," Silverton interrupted, and he sounded wrecked. Completely wrecked. "I know. Rowan, I'm so sorry. For everything. For the choice I made 6 years ago, for bringing you here, for—" "Stop." She held up a hand, unable to hear his apologies, knowing they would break her. "Tomorrow will be the last session. I'll put everything I have into one final healing. If it works, Ashton lives. If it doesn't—" She couldn't finish that sentence. Couldn't say out loud what failure would mean. "And then you'll leave." It wasn't a question. "And then I leave," she confirmed. "Because this is killing us both, and your son deserves better than a healer who can't function anymore." Silverton opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, wanted to beg her to stay, wanted to say any of the 1,000 things written across his face. But in the end, he just nodded. Because he knew she was right. Because there was no other choice left that wouldn't destroy them completely. Chapter 7. That night, Rowan didn't sleep. She sat in her chamber, staring at the moonlight streaming through her window, and prepared herself for what tomorrow would require. To save Ashton, she would have to surrender completely to the mate bond. Stop fighting it. Stop holding back. Let it flow through her with no barriers or protections. It would be agony. It might kill her. But it was the only way to pour enough healing energy into the pup to reverse 4 years of genetic damage in a single session. And after, assuming she survived it, she would pack her leather satchel and walk out of this castle and never return. She would go back to Thornridge, to her stone cottage and her quiet practice and her life in the margins. And she would spend however many years she had left slowly dying from an incomplete mate bond that refused to let her go. It wasn't a good plan. But it was the only one she had. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Rowan stood at her chamber window and watched the sun rise over the northern territories, painting the mountains gold and pink, beautiful and indifferent to the tragedy playing out beneath them. This was the 15th day. The last day. After this, one way or another, it would be over. She dressed in the same simple clothes she had worn every day, tied her dark red hair back with a leather cord, and picked up her satchel. She wouldn't be returning to this room. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she would leave directly from the nursery, walk out of the castle gates, and not look back. Looking back would kill her. The corridors were empty this early, the castle still half asleep. But when she reached the nursery, she found the door already open and Silverton inside with his son. He hadn't slept either. She could tell. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, and he looked like a man standing on the edge of a precipice, trying to decide whether to jump or be pushed. Ashton was worse. Whatever progress they had made over the previous days had been undone by yesterday's disaster. His breathing was shallow and labored again, his small body barely moving except for the rise and fall of his chest. The metal braces seemed to weigh him down, a constant reminder of how broken he was. When his amber eyes flickered open to look at his father, there was a resignation in them that no child should possess. He knew he was dying. Had probably known for a while. 9 p.m. "I need everyone to leave," Rowan said quietly. "What I'm about to do cannot be witnessed." The royal physicians who had been monitoring Ashton overnight looked to Silverton for confirmation. He nodded once, sharp and final, and they filed out without argument. But Silverton himself didn't move. "You too," Rowan said. "No." His voice left no room for negotiation. "He's my son. I'm not leaving him." She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that having him in the room would make this infinitely harder, that the mate bond would use his proximity to dig its hooks deeper. But looking at his face, at the desperate love of a father watching his child slip away, she couldn't bring herself to force him out. "Fine. But stay back. Don't interfere no matter what happens." He positioned himself near the window, as far from the bed as the room allowed. Rowan turned her full attention to Ashton. The pup watched her with his father's eyes, so much trust and hope in that gaze that it made her chest hurt. "I'm going to try something different today," she told him gently. "It might hurt at first, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Ashton nodded, the movement so small it was barely visible. Rowan knelt beside the bed, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, and placed both hands on Ashton's spine. But this time, instead of fighting the mate bond, instead of trying to push through it or ignore it or pretend it didn't exist, she surrendered to it completely. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The mate bond roared to life with a violence that stole her breath. But instead of fighting it, Rowan opened herself to it. Let it flood through her like a dam breaking. The pain was transcendent, beyond anything she had experienced before. But beneath the pain was something else. Power. Raw, unfiltered, massive power born from a fated bond that had been denied for 6 years and was finally, being allowed to exist. Her healing energy amplified 1,000-fold. She felt it pouring into Ashton like liquid starlight, like every good thing in the universe concentrated into a single point. His wolf responded instantly, unfurling like a flower that had been waiting for the right conditions to bloom. She felt the genetic rejection that had been killing him begin to unravel. Felt his DNA remembering how to exist in harmony instead of war. Felt the ossification in his spine start to reverse, bone softening back to what it should be, nerves reconnecting, life returning to places that had been dying. But the mate bond wasn't satisfied with just healing. It wanted completion. It wanted Silverton. Across the room, she felt rather than saw him collapse. The bond was tearing through him with equal force, connecting them in a way that was both agony and ecstasy, destroying them and rebuilding them at the same time. She felt his wolf reaching for hers. Felt the desperate need to close the distance between them, to finish what they had started 6 years ago in a throne room when their eyes first met. It would be so easy. She was already halfway there, already falling into the bond, already losing herself in the connection. All she would have to do was stop resisting. Let the bond take her. But that would mean accepting a life of being his secret. His hidden mate while another woman wore the crown. His shameful reminder of a bond he had tried to deny. And Rowan had more respect for herself than that, even if the bond didn't. So she held on. Kept her focus on Ashton. Poured everything she had into healing this pup. And refused to let the bond pull her any further toward its inevitable conclusion. Time became meaningless. She had no idea if she had been kneeling there for minutes or hours. All she knew was the healing energy flowing through her, the mate bond screaming for completion, and Ashton's small body growing stronger beneath her hands. The ossification reversed. The genetic rejection stopped. His wolf settled into his body like it had finally found home. And then, impossibly, miraculously, Ashton moved. It started with his back legs, still wrapped in metal braces, twitching with real voluntary movement. Then the braces themselves began to crack, unable to contain the sudden surge of strength as muscles that had never worked properly suddenly remembered their purpose. The metal split with a sharp, clear sound, pieces clattering to the floor, and Ashton's legs kicked free. The pup's eyes flew wide open. His breathing, which had been so shallow and labored, suddenly came deep and easy. And before Rowan could process what was happening, before she could stop him or help him or even react, Ashton stood up. He stood on his own 4 legs for the first time in 4 years. Stood without support, without pain, without the weight of a death sentence hanging over him. He took a tentative step, then another, then looked at his father with an expression of pure, unbridled joy. "Papa. Papa, I'm walking. I'm actually walking." For a moment, the entire world held its breath. Then Silverton made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both, and fell completely apart. Chapter 8. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories, who had ruled his kingdom with an iron fist and made impossible choices in the name of duty, dropped to the stone floor and broke. Not with relief, though that was part of it. Not with joy, though that was there too. But with the full, crushing weight of what he had done. The realization of what his choices had cost, written across every shaking sob, every gasping breath, every tear that fell unchecked down his face. He had rejected his fated mate for political power. Had gambled his son's life on the assumption that he could build a kingdom without a true Luna. Had condemned 3 people to half-lives for a crown that suddenly felt worthless compared to what he had sacrificed to wear it. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words barely intelligible through his tears. "I'm so sorry. To both of you. To all of you. What have I done? What have I done?" Rowan stood on shaking legs, her hands still glowing faintly with residual healing energy, and watched the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories come undone. Part of her wanted to go to him, to comfort him, to tell him that Ashton would be all right now. But a larger part, the part that had been broken 6 years ago and had spent every day since trying to rebuild herself, knew that going to him now would be a mistake she could never take back. Behind Silverton, the door opened. Luna Serafina stood in the threshold, drawn by the sounds of crying, or perhaps by some instinct that told her something fundamental had shifted. She took in the scene with a single glance. Ashton standing whole and healthy, taking experimental steps around the room with wonder in his eyes. Silverton broken on the floor. Rowan standing apart, clearly preparing to leave. And in her expression, Rowan saw understanding, acceptance, and something that looked almost like relief. Serafina stepped fully into the room. She walked past her husband without acknowledging him, knelt beside Ashton, and wrapped her arms around the pup she had raised as her own. "You're all right," she whispered into his silver-white fur. "You're finally all right." She held him for a long moment, this woman who had known from the beginning that she was a placeholder for a bond that should have been. Then she stood, turned to face Rowan, and inclined her head in a gesture that was part gratitude and part goodbye. She understood what was about to happen. Understood that the true Luna was leaving, and that she would remain as the political face of a marriage that was dead in all but name. And that all of them would spend the rest of their lives living with the consequences of choices made years ago. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it was what they had. Silverton finally looked up, his amber eyes red and raw and devastated. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. So he just knelt there on the stone floor and stared at Rowan like she was the sun and he had been living in darkness for 6 years and was only now remembering what light looked like. "Stay," he finally managed, and it was barely a whisper. Just that one word. A plea, not a command. A desperate, hopeless request from a man who knew he had no right to ask but couldn't stop himself from trying. The mate bond pulled at Rowan like hooks in her soul, urging her to say yes, to forget everything and just accept whatever scraps of a bond he could offer her. But she had learned over 6 years of exile and healing and slowly rebuilding herself that she was worth more than scraps. That she deserved a mate who chose her first, not last. That loving someone who could never fully be hers would destroy her more completely than any rejection ever could. "I saved your son," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "That was the miracle. There isn't another one coming." She picked up her leather satchel, the same one she had carried into this castle 2 weeks ago, and walked toward the door. Every step felt like tearing off a piece of her own soul. The mate bond screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to give him one more chance. But she kept walking. Past Serafina, who watched her with hollow eyes that held no anger, only understanding. Past Ashton, who was too young to comprehend what was happening but would someday learn that he lived because an Omega healer had sacrificed everything to save him. Past Silverton, who remained on the floor, destroyed by choices he had made when he thought duty was more important than destiny. The corridor outside was filling with people. Word had spread that something was happening in the royal nursery, and courtiers and servants and guards were gathering, whispering, speculating. They parted like a wave as Rowan walked through them, her dark red braids swinging with each step, her face set in an expression that discouraged questions. She walked through the castle she had first entered 6 years ago with hope in her heart. Walked past rooms where she had once imagined she might belong. Walked down stairs she had climbed with dreams of a future that would never exist. And with each step, the mate bond pulled tighter. A living thing connecting her to a man she was leaving behind. A connection that would slowly kill them both now that she was walking away. Chapter 9. The castle gates stood open, morning light spilling through them, offering escape. Rowan reached them and paused, her hand resting on the cold iron, one last moment of doubt making her hesitate. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy, running, desperate. For a moment, her heart surged with irrational hope. But when she turned, it wasn't Silverton. It was his sister Evelyn, the one who had sent the original letter begging Rowan to come. The princess was breathless from running, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Please," Evelyn said. "Please don't leave like this. Give him a chance to." "To what?" Rowan interrupted, not unkindly. "To apologize for rejecting me? To offer me a place as his hidden mate while his legal wife sits on the throne beside him? To ask me to live in the shadows of a castle that should have been partly mine, watching him fulfill obligations to another woman while the bond burns through both of us?" She shook her head. "I saved Ashton. That's what I came here to do. The rest isn't my responsibility to fix." "The bond will kill you," Evelyn said desperately. "An incomplete mate bond left to deteriorate, it destroys both parties. You know this. Within a year, maybe 2, you'll start feeling the effects. Weakness, illness, your wolf slowly fading. And Silverton will suffer the same fate. Is that really what you want?" "I know," Rowan said simply. "But I would rather die slowly from a bond one walked away from than live slowly in a bond I'm not allowed to complete. At least this way, the choice is mine." "He loves you," Evelyn tried one last time. "He's always loved you. Every decision he's made, every moment of the last 6 years, has been haunted by you. By the choice he made. By the bond he tried to deny. Don't you think he's suffered enough?" Rowan felt something crack inside her chest, but her voice remained steady. "Has he suffered?" "Yes. But suffering doesn't erase what he chose. Doesn't change the fact that when he had to decide between me and his crown, he chose the crown. And he would choose it again, Evelyn. That's who he is. That's who he has to be." She turned back to the gates. Tell him I hope Ashton has a long and happy life. That's all I came here to do." She took one step forward, then another, her boots crunching on the gravel path. Behind her in the castle, Ashton was discovering he could run. Was bounding through the corridors with puppy energy that made the staff weep with joy and relief. The heir to the Northern Territories was whole and healthy and would grow up to be a strong alpha. All because an Omega healer had loved him enough to destroy herself saving him. Behind her, in the castle, Luna Serafina was returning to her chambers to stare at a crown she had never wanted and a marriage that had been dead from the start, trying to find some way to live with the knowledge that she would spend the rest of her life as a placeholder for a bond that should have been. Behind her in the castle, Silverton Blackthorn remained on the floor of the nursery, broken by joy and regret in equal measure, learning that some choices cannot be unmade, no matter how many tears you shed or how desperately you wish you could take them back. And between them all, the mate bond pulled and burned and refused to die. A living thing that would slowly destroy them both now that Rowan had walked away. But at least this destruction was on her terms. At least this time, the choice to leave had been hers. The castle gates closed behind her with a final, echoing boom. Rowan didn't look back. Didn't let herself imagine Silverton standing at his window, watching her go. Didn't acknowledge the mate bond that was already beginning its slow work of killing them both. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, away from the castle and the king and the life that might have been, toward Thornridge and obscurity and whatever years she had left. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to the tragedy of incomplete bonds and rejected mates. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf began to howl, a sound of such profound loneliness that it seemed to echo across the entire kingdom. Rowan didn't need to look back to know it was Silverton. She felt it in her chest, in the mate bond that connected them, in the piece of her heart that would always belong to the man who had let her go. But she kept walking. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes destiny isn't enough. Sometimes all you have is the choice to save yourself, even when it feels like dying. Chapter 10. 6 months passed like a slow death. Rowan returned to Thornridge and tried to rebuild the life she had left behind. Her cottage welcomed her back with familiar creaks and the scent of dried herbs. Her patience returned, grateful for her healing hands, unaware of the price she was paying with every breath. But everything was different now. The incomplete mate bond was doing exactly what Evelyn had warned it would do. Rowan could feel herself fading, bit by bit. She tired more easily. Her healing gift, once so powerful, now flickered and waned. Some mornings she could barely get out of bed, her wolf whimpering somewhere deep inside her, crying for a mate she would never have. She had made her peace with it. This was the death she had chosen. Slow and quiet and on her own terms. Until the day a royal messenger arrived at her door again. This time, there was no pretense of anonymity. The wolf wore full royal colors, the crest of the Northern Territories emblazoned on his chest. He handed her a sealed letter with the king's official seal and waited while she opened it. Inside were 3 words in Silverton's handwriting. Please, come back. And beneath it, a medical report that made her blood run cold. Ashton was sick again. Not with incomplete bond syndrome, that had been cured. But with something new, something the physicians were calling secondary rejection syndrome. His body had accepted the healing, had thrived for months, but now it was beginning to reject again. Not because of genetics this time, but because the healing itself had been incomplete. Because Rowan had walked away before the bond had finished its work. The report explained it in clinical terms. The healing energy used to cure the prince was drawn from an incomplete fated mate bond. While the initial healing was successful, the lack of bond completion has created an unstable foundation. The prince's wolf is essentially searching for the other half of the healing energy, the completed bond, and finding nothing. Without intervention, he will deteriorate again within 3 months. At the bottom of the report, in Silverton's handwriting, I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to finish saving him. Please. Rowan. I'll give you anything. Everything. Just please don't let my son die because of my mistakes. Rowan sat in her cottage, the letter trembling in her hands, and laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. The universe, it seemed, had one more twist of the knife left in it. She could let Ashton die. Could tell herself it wasn't her responsibility, that she had already sacrificed enough, that Silverton's choices weren't hers to fix. But she was a healer. And healers don't let children die. even when saving them means completing a bond that will bind you to the man who broke you. Chapter 11. Rowan arrived at Ironhaven Castle 3 days later, and this time there was no pretense, no secrecy. The entire kingdom knew she was coming, knew what her return meant. The gates opened for her, and she walked through them like a woman walking to her execution. Because, in a way, she was. The life she had tried to build in Thornridge, the independence she had fought so hard to maintain, all of it would end the moment she completed the bond. She would be bound to Silverton forever, fated mates in truth, but still living in a kingdom where another woman wore the crown. Silverton was waiting for her in the throne room this time, not the nursery. The same room where he had rejected her 6 years ago. The same stained glass windows painting everything in amber and gold. But he wasn't sitting on the throne. He was standing in front of it, and when she entered, he dropped to his knees. An Alpha King kneeling before an Omega healer. The court gasped. This was unheard of. Kings didn't kneel. Not even for their fated mates. Rowan Ashford, he said, his voice carrying across the silent throne room. 6 years ago, I stood in this room and made the worst mistake of my life. I chose duty over destiny. I chose politics over you. I told myself it was for the greater good, that a kingdom needed stability more than I needed happiness. He looked up at her with those amber eyes that haunted her dreams. I was wrong. I have been wrong every day since. I condemned my son to a slow death, condemned you to a life of exile, condemned myself to live half alive, going through the motions of ruling while feeling nothing, being nothing, because the part of me that mattered most was walking away. He reached into his coat and pulled out something that made the entire court gasp again. His crown. I can't undo the past, he continued, holding the crown in his hands like it was poison. I can't take back the choice I made. But I can make a different choice now. So I'm asking you, Rowan, not as your king, but as a man who has loved you every single day since the moment we met. Will you complete the bond? Will you save my son one more time? And will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness? He placed the crown on the floor between them. I'm abdicating. Evelyn will take the throne. She's always been better suited for it anyway. Serafina and I will dissolve our marriage. She's already agreed. It's been nothing but a political arrangement. And she deserves better. We all deserve better. The throne room erupted in chaos. Courtiers shouting, council members protesting. But Silverton's eyes never left Rowan's face. I'm not asking you to be my hidden mate anymore. I'm asking you to be my only mate. My true mate. The Luna you should have been from the beginning. And if you say no, I'll accept it. I'll let you walk away again, and I'll live with the consequences. But I needed you to know that I choose you, Rowan. Finally, completely, irrevocably. I choose you. Rowan stood there, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was everything she had wanted 6 years ago. Everything she had dreamed about during long, lonely nights in Thornridge. But it was also the thing she had sworn she would never accept. A bond completed out of desperation, not choice. Out of necessity, not love. Except. Looking at Silverton kneeling before her, crown discarded on the floor, kingdom in chaos around him, she realized something. This was choice. Maybe it had taken 6 years and a dying child and the slow deterioration of an incomplete bond to get here. Maybe the path had been messy and painful and all wrong. But he was choosing her. Finally. Completely. And she had a choice too. She could walk away again, could maintain her pride and her independence and die slowly from a bond that would never be complete. Or she could forgive him. Could accept that people make mistakes, even terrible ones, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone a second chance. "Stand up," she said quietly. Silverton stood, his whole body trembling, hope and fear warring in his expression. Rowan took a step forward. Then another. Until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, could smell his scent, pine and winter and something uniquely him that made her wolf sing. "If we do this," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "if we complete this bond, you need to understand something. I'm not the same Omega you rejected 6 years ago. I'm not going to be silent or convenient or grateful just to be here. I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to demand respect. I'm going to be your equal in every way that matters, crown or no crown." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Silverton said, his own tears falling freely now. "I don't want a convenient mate, Rowan. I want you. All of you. The healer who saves children no one else can save. The Omega who walked away from a king because she knew her own worth. The woman who has haunted me every single day for 6 years." "And Ashton?" she asked. "After we complete the bond and I heal him again, he'll be fine?" "The physicians say yes. A completed bond will provide stable healing energy. He'll grow up strong and healthy." Rowan closed her eyes, felt the incomplete mate bond burning in her chest, felt her wolf pressing forward, felt 6 years of pain and loneliness and quiet suffering begging for release. She opened her eyes and looked at the man who had broken her heart and was now offering to spend his life putting it back together. "Then let's finish what we started," she said. And she kissed him. Chapter 12. The moment their lips met, the incomplete mate bond roared to life one final time. But this time, Rowan didn't fight it. This time she surrendered completely, letting it sweep through her like a wildfire, burning away 6 years of pain and rejection and loneliness, leaving only the truth that had always been there. They were mates, fated and chosen, and nothing, not crowns or politics or time or distance, could change that. The bond completed itself with a force that dropped them both to their knees, their bodies pressed together, their wolves finally finding each other after years of searching. Rowan felt Silverton's wolf merge with hers, felt their souls twining together, felt the empty space in her chest that had ached for 6 years suddenly fill with warmth and light and rightness. She felt his love for her, bone deep and unwavering despite his terrible choice. Felt his regret, sharp and cutting as broken glass. Felt his desperate hope that this second chance would be enough. And beneath it all, she felt her own love for him, the love she had tried so hard to kill, surfacing like a flower breaking through concrete. Stubborn and impossible to destroy. When they finally broke apart, gasping, the throne room was silent. Every wolf present had felt it, the completion of a true fated mate bond, something rare and sacred and undeniable. And on the faces of the courtiers and council members, Rowan saw something shift. They weren't looking at a poor Omega healer anymore. They were looking at their true Luna. Silverton stood and helped her to her feet. Then, in front of the entire court, he took her hand and placed it over his heart. "I, Silverton Blackthorn, formally reject my claim to the throne of the Northern Territories and name my sister, Evelyn Blackthorn, as my successor. And I claim Rowan Ashford as my true mate, my Luna, chosen by fate and by choice." He turned to the court. "Any who have objections may voice them now." Silence. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then joined by others, until the entire throne room was filled with applause. And standing in the doorway, her face peaceful for the first time since Rowan had met her, was Seraphina. She walked forward, and Rowan tensed, unsure what to expect. But Seraphina simply smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful political expression she usually wore. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for just Rowan to hear. For freeing us all." Then she turned to the court. "I, Seraphina of the Eastern Pax, formally dissolve my marriage to Silverton Blackthorn. Our union was political, never blessed by a mate bond, and it ends with mutual respect and no animosity. I return to my family's territory with gratitude for the years spent here and hope for a continued alliance between our packs." She inclined her head to Rowan. "Your true Luna has returned. Honor her as she deserves." Then she swept out of the throne room, her head held high, finally free from a marriage that had been a cage for them both. Chapter 13. They went to Ashton immediately. The pup was weaker than he had been 6 months ago, the secondary rejection syndrome already taking its toll. But when he saw Rowan and his father enter hand in hand, he smiled. "You came back," he said, his voice weak but happy. "I knew you would." "I'm sorry it took so long," Rowan said, kneeling beside his bed. "But I'm here now. And this time, the healing will stick. I promise." She placed her hands on his spine, and Silverton placed his hands over hers. Together, their completed mate bond blazing bright and true, they poured healing energy into Ashton. It was different this time. Stronger. Stable. Where before the healing had been drawn from Rowan's gift alone, now it flowed from both of them, from the completed bond that connected them, from a source that would never run dry. Ashton's body responded immediately. The rejection stopped. His wolf settled. His breathing eased. And when they pulled their hands away 20 minutes later, he sat up on his own, eyes bright and clear. I feel perfect," he said, wonder in his voice. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Nothing hurts." Silverton pulled his son into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down his face. "You're going to be fine, Ash. You're going to grow up strong and healthy, and you're going to be an amazing alpha someday." Ashton hugged his father back, then reached out for Rowan. She gathered him close, this pup she had sacrificed everything to save, and felt her heart expand to make room for him. "Does this mean you're staying?" Ashton asked hopefully. "Are you going to be my mom now?" Rowan looked at Silverton, saw the hope and love and gratitude shining in his amber eyes, and smiled. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm staying." Chapter 14. The formal coronation ceremony took place 1 year to the day after Rowan completed the mate bond. Evelyn had ruled well in the interim, making the transition of power smooth and stabilizing the kingdom with a firm but fair hand. But tradition demanded a formal ceremony, and tradition demanded that both the new queen and the former king's true mate be honored. Rowan stood in the same throne room where she had been rejected 6 years ago, where she had been claimed 1 year ago, wearing a gown of deep green that matched her eyes. Her dark red hair was unbound, cascading down her back in waves, and around her neck she wore a simple silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, Silverton's mating gift to her. Beside her stood Silverton, no crown on his head but joy in his eyes. He had spent the last year by her side, learning what it meant to be a true partner, learning to listen and compromise and share power rather than hoard it. And between them, holding both their hands, was Ashton, now 5 years old, healthy and strong and running circles around his tutors with boundless energy. Evelyn took the throne, and the kingdom cheered. She was a good queen, fair and wise, and everyone could see it. But when Evelyn called Rowan forward, when she placed a circlet of silver on Rowan's head and named her true Luna of the Northern Territories, an honorary title with no political power but immense symbolic weight, the cheers were deafening. "Rowan Ashford," Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the throne room, "came to us as a healer and gave us back our heir. She came as a rejected mate and showed us the true meaning of strength. She walked away from a king and proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is know your own worth. And she came back, not because she had to, but because she chose love over pride, forgiveness over bitterness, and hope over hurt." Evelyn smiled at her. "You are our true Luna, chosen by fate and proven by choice. We honor you." Rowan felt tears slip down her cheeks as the kingdom she had once thought would never accept her roared its approval. Silverton squeezed her hand, and when she looked at him, she saw her own joy reflected in his face. They had taken the long way around, had made mistakes and paid terrible prices and hurt each other in ways that might never fully heal. But they had also found their way back to each other, had chosen forgiveness and second chances and the hard work of building something real from broken pieces. And that, Rowan thought as she looked out over the throne room full of wolves celebrating their true Luna, was its own kind of miracle. Later that night, after the ceremony and the feast and the endless well-wishes, Rowan and Silverton walked through the castle gardens under a sky full of stars. Ashton was asleep in his chambers, watched over by guards and nannies, finally healthy enough that they didn't worry every time he closed his eyes. "Do you ever regret it?" Silverton asked quietly as they walked hand in hand through rows of night-blooming flowers. "Coming back, completing the bond, giving me a second chance I didn't deserve." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, considering. Did she regret it? The question was more complicated than it seemed. "I regret that it took 6 years and a dying child to get here," she said finally. "I regret that I had to walk away and slowly die before you understood what you'd given up. I regret that Ashton suffered because of choices made before he was born." She stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "But do I regret being here now? Do I regret completing the bond? Do I regret choosing forgiveness?" She shook her head. "No. Because this version of you, the one who learned humility, who gave up a crown for love, who kneels when he's wrong and fights when it matters, this version is worth every tear I shed, every lonely night in Thornridge, every moment I thought I was going to die from an incomplete bond." She reached up and cupped his face. "You broke my heart, Silverton. And then you spent a year putting it back together, piece by piece, with patience and love and actions instead of just words. That's worth something. That's worth everything." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret giving me a second chance." "I know," she said simply. Because she did know. She felt it in the bond that connected them, in the way he looked at her like she was his entire world, in the 1,000 small ways he showed her every day that she mattered. They stood there for a long moment, two mates who had found each other the hard way, holding on to each other under the stars. "Rowan," Silverton said softly. Thank you. For saving my son. For saving me. For being strong enough to walk away and brave enough to come back." She smiled against his chest. "Thank you for finally choosing me." I'll choose you every day for the rest of our lives, he promised. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs me. Even when the whole world tells me I'm wrong. I'll choose you. And he did. 5 years later, Rowan stood in the castle nursery, a different one from where she'd healed Ashton all those years ago, holding a tiny pup with silver-white fur and her green eyes. Her daughter. Hers and Silverton's. Born from a completed mate bond and absolutely perfect in every way. Ashton, now 10 years old and growing into a fine young wolf, peered over her shoulder at his baby sister with wonder. "She's so small," he whispered, as if afraid he might break her with his voice. "You were once this small too," Rowan reminded him with a smile. "Was I really?" He seemed doubtful. "You were. Although you were sicker then. Your sister is healthy and strong, just like you are now." Ashton reached out a careful paw to touch his sister's tiny hand, and the pup immediately wrapped her fingers around his paw, holding on tight. "She likes me," Ashton said, his voice full of awe. "Of course she does," Silverton said from the doorway. "You're her big brother. She's going to follow you around and copy everything you do and drive you absolutely crazy for the next 18 years. Ashton grinned. "I can't wait." Rowan looked up at Silverton, at the man who had broken her and then spent years putting her back together. He had kept every promise. Had chosen her every single day. Had built a life with her that was messy and complicated and real and more than she had ever dreamed possible. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful not to disturb the sleeping pup in her arms, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," she admitted. And it was true. She had built a life from broken pieces. Had learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that saves you. Had discovered that second chances are rare and precious and worth fighting for. She looked down at her daughter, at Ashton beaming beside her, at the mate bond that glowed warm and complete in her chest, connecting her to the man she loved. This was her miracle. Not the healing that had saved Ashton all those years ago. Not the bond that had completed itself against all odds. But this messy, beautiful, hard-won family that she had chosen and that had chosen her back. "Tell me again," Ashton said, settling onto the floor beside them. "Tell me the story of how you saved me and how Dad broke down in tears." Rowan laughed. "You've heard that story 100 times. I want to hear it again. Please." So she told it. The story of the poor Omega healer who walked into a castle to save a dying pup. The story of the Alpha King who had made a terrible choice and spent years learning to make better ones. The story of a mate bond that refused to die even when it should have. The story of forgiveness and second chances and love that was worth fighting for. Ashton listened with rapt attention, even though he knew every word by heart. And when she got to the part where Silverton had broken down in tears, had fallen to his knees in gratitude and grief, Ashton always asked the same question. "And you forgave him?" "Eventually," Rowan said, stroking her daughter's soft fur. "Not right away. Forgiveness took time. But yes, I forgave him." "Why?" Ashton asked, his young face serious. "He hurt you really badly." It was a good question. The kind of question that deserved an honest answer. "Because holding on to hate would have killed me just as surely as the incomplete bond," Rowan said. "Because everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. And because love, real love, isn't about never getting hurt. It's about what you do after the hurt. It's about choosing to rebuild even when it would be easier to walk away. She looked at Silverton, saw the love and gratitude shining in his amber eyes, and smiled. Your father hurt me. But then he spent years showing me, every single day, that he had learned better. That he would do better. And eventually that was enough. Ashton nodded thoughtfully, processing this. When I grow up and find my mate, I'm going to choose them first. Right away. I'm not going to make them wait or hurt them or almost lose them. I'm going to be smart and choose them from the beginning. Rowan felt her heart swell with pride. I think that's a wonderful plan, sweetheart. Silverton chuckled. Learn from your old man's mistakes, son. Don't make the same ones. I won't, Ashton promised seriously. Then he grinned. I'm going to be a much better alpha than you were. I have no doubt, Silverton said warmly. You already are. Later, after Ashton had been shooed off to bed and the baby was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Rowan and Silverton stood by the nursery window, watching the moon rise over the Northern Territories. Do you think our story will have a happy ending? Silverton asked quietly. Rowan leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back, feeling the mate bond humming contentedly between them. I think, she said slowly, that we're already living the happy ending. This, right here, right now, this is it. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. And that's all we can ask for. He tightened his arms around her. I love you, Rowan. I should have said it 6 years ago, should have said it instead of sending you away, but I'm saying it now. I love you. I choose you. Always. I love you too, she whispered back. Even when I didn't want to. Even when I tried not to. Even when loving you felt like dying. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. They stood there in the moonlight, two mates who had found each other the hard way, holding on to each other and the second chance they had fought so hard to build. And in her cradle, their daughter slept peacefully, born from a bond that had been broken and healed and proven stronger for the breaking. Some miracles, Rowan thought, come quickly, a sudden healing, an impossible cure, a child standing when he should have died. But the best miracles, the ones worth having, come slowly. They come from forgiveness and patience and the hard work of choosing love even when it costs you everything. And those miracles, she had learned, are the ones that last forever. And that, my friends, is the story of Rowan and Silverton. Of the poor Omega healer who saved a dying pup and broke an Alpha King's heart in the process. Of the mate bond that refused to die. Of forgiveness that was earned, not given. And of a love that was worth fighting for, even when it seemed impossible. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every moment of pain and healing and hope, drop a comment below telling me what you loved most about it. Did you cry when Silverton broke down? Did you cheer when Rowan walked away? Did you believe in their second chance? I want to hear all your thoughts. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we have so many more stories like this coming your way. Stories of fated mates and impossible choices. Stories of love that costs everything and gives back more. Stories that will make you feel deeply and believe in happy endings, even when they come the hard way. Thank you for spending these hours with me, walking through Rowan and Silverton's journey. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest miracles aren't the ones that save lives, but the ones that teach us how to live them. See you in the next story.